Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining today. This is designed to be a recording of the chair's address, which I gave on the 10th of September at the Institution of Mechanical Engineers headquarters building in Birdcage Walk in London. Unfortunately, there were technical issues with that recording, and there were technical issues for some of the online participants. It was run as a hybrid meeting. So we're doing it again. And so very much welcome the people who are joining online and welcome people who are watching it on a subsequent occasion as a recorded thing where it will be hosted on the IMechE website. So thank you for joining. I'm going to talk about engineering good connections. That's the topic for my year as a chair of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers' Railway Division. So now I'm finding a way to get the slide to move. I'm waiting with this. Here. Great. So health warnings then. This address is intended to be challenging, maybe technically challenging for me. If you have any IT issues, just wanted to warn that if you could put those in the chat, then my colleague Rebeka from the IMechE staff will help you there. If you have any actual questions that you want to ask me, then if you could put them in the Q&A section, and then we can have that discussion when it comes to the end of the address. So that would be brilliant. So I'm intending to stimulate some conversation, just a few health warnings then. I respect traditions generally. I recognise I'm another chair in a long row of furniture, if you like. I know I've got personal limitations. I'm primarily know about conventional railways, a lot of it in the UK. I know about asset management, and I know about applying R&D and that sort of thing, and I've dabbled in policy stuff. And I want to share my aspirations, and I think that we offer a healthy perspective on ups and downs and challenges. Things sometimes work well and sometimes less well for engineers, and we feel differently, and for railways and what's happening and how they're perceived. So this point about the good connections is this aim to connect, to inspire engineers and to influence decision makers, because there are some who sadly are not engineers amongst the decision makers, but to help them be better informed. But there's very much acknowledging that this is a picture of me here on the railway technical tour, and I can't remember what I was trying to understand. I think it was something to do with the platform train interface, and whether this door protruded a lip a bit to address that balance, that gap that sometimes transpires between the train and the platform. It's a very tricky interface for those of us who engage with it. Anyway, moving on. Tradition has it that the incoming chair offers their autobiography. So I wasn't going to do that because it's a bit boring. So I wasn't going to do that. Oh goodness, when was I born? Which interestingly was when the first automatic train operated railway opened. No prices, it comes up later. So I'll be letting you know if you don't know already. I thought, I at 16 I did O levels, and just before that, a teacher said to me, took me aside out of assembly and said, "Don't you know that there are rough men in engineering?" So what I did when we had this lecture in person was I asked the engineers amongst us to stand and look at each other. So I don't know if you want to do that in your mind's eye. If you're an engineer, would you think of the engineers you know? Are they rough men? And then I had a control position here where I say, okay, so those of you who are here who are not engineers, would you like to stand, or metaphorically, to think of those people that you know who are not engineers, and are they rough men? So is there a huge difference between those two sets of people? Um, uh, that didn't cause me much pause for reflection at the time. I got on with it. I did A levels in maths, physics, and chemistry, general studies, bit of French. And then I became a British Rail sponsored student, and I did holiday work in different depots around the UK. And then I had an exchange with the SNCF in Paris with my fluent French, came in handy. I worked on TGV, train, high speed train, the highest speed train at the time. And then I was a depot shift manager. And I thought a useful quote that obviously, so I'm not going to go into my autobiography, but as a boring old fart, I might quote someone who I met at that time, who's a senior engineer within British Railways. He said, "Ah, I've never met a lady shift production manager." And I said, "You haven't met one now. You've simply met a shift production manager who happens to be female." And there was some discussion afterwards about what this meant and the rest of it. And what was interesting was that I heard on the British Rail grapevine a few months later that this said senior manager was heard introducing one of his team and saying, "Ah, perhaps you'd like to meet Helena. She's one of the engineers in our team who happens to be female." So I felt that I'd conveyed that message at the time. And then I did a bunch of other jobs within the train operating company as it became, and then it was privatisation, so to join Porterbrook, various issues. Oh, I got chartered, which was obviously significant in terms of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, my mentor. And then I went on to do some international work in consultancy around asset management and maintenance services. Got to be the engineering director at ATOC. Oh, and then, oops, there's the stuff about parenting. So I became a parent, and when I gave birth, I said to the baby who emerged, "Oh, hello, you must be Miriam," and they were, and and I was given prior to that when I went on maternity leave a visual aid that I want to share with you. This aid here, which was a guide to parenting. So I don't know how well that shows up to you. Just in case it doesn't show up very well, it's a touchy-feely book which is called "That's Not My Train. Its wheels are too squashy." And if you can actually push on the wheels and see just how squashy they are. So the Railway Industry Association, which represents the manufacturers of trains, to give these hints and tips to me in how to parent a child to be a good buyer of trains and a user of trains, I thought was very helpful. And I wanted to let you know that it was extremely successful, and that child actually came to my in-person address, and because they are now grown up and becoming an engineer there as an engineering student, although I have to confess a civil engineer, still an engineer. So then I did other things more to do with ideas and new R&D, and then I'm having huge amount of fun, obviously, bringing those ideas into the railway industry, new ideas, developments. And my boss also came along to the institution, like to the lecture I gave in person. So let's not do that. Autobiography could get really boring, very interesting to me. And being the 57th chair, age 57, all that blah blah. Let's not. Let's look at something else. Let's look at somebody else's autobiography. Maybe this is something that I gathered from the Railway Division technical tour that we run every year, and this was in the as you can see in the museum there. So this is a reflection on the past nearly 100 years and a bit. So this was someone in 1917 reflecting on that she had a dream job, and then the museum saying, it must be true if it's in a museum, that after World War One, the railway aura was gnawed away, and the state was diminishingly credible. Travel was democratized, and there was competition from other means of transport. So part of what I want to challenge is that perception of what has happened to railways since World War II, for example, and what should be happening to railways going forward, looking to this next 200 years, having had the previous 200 years celebrated. So I want to go then to first principles. Forget that autobiography stuff. What's it about? Railway technology. So if we look here, we've got steel on steel is really nice, low energy. There we go. It wooden wheels on dirt is hard to press along. It takes a lot of energy. Wooden wheels on wooden rails, not much greater. There was a heave there from my glamorous assistant. But if we put steel wheels and steel rails, it goes too fast for me to cope with recording it on my camera there, on my phone. So steel on steel's really good. so much less rolling resistance. It's grounded, so much less energy than anything else that one might use. Oops, sorry. So I want to see if I can click out of dual loop in this, get to the next page. Hey, the next page has going round corners on it. Toned wheels. So that guided transport is a great thing about railway technology, as well as the sheer steel on steel. And so what I'm not going to talk about is maglev, very expensive stuff, and hyperloop, very expensive, and nobody's done it yet. So let's just focus on, I want to focus on steel guided transport, and it's really good economic benefits from fixity. It is where it is. You know it's going to stay there, and that can promote regeneration. And safety benefits, hugely lower fatality rate, to take it at the highest, the worst case, than other modes of transport, even in the UK, where our road fatality rate is massively low. So you've got that good technology. What's it good for? What does good railway technology do? And I would say it delivers capacity. It moves. We are able to move in the railway industry a lot of people or a lot of stuff fast and effectively and at big volume. So, and that is best if we, in terms of passengers, particularly if we accelerate quickly, and if we brake quickly, and if we're as homogeneous as possible, so we have the same sort of pattern, and then we can maximize the pathing. And if we have short station dwell, so we don't hang about, and that, going back to that PTI, that passenger train interface on my first slide. So we can maximize the amount that we do that's useful, maximize the people that get to move places and the stuff that gets to move places. And those are sort of things that we set out in a policy document for the IMechE that I lead authored in 2017, increasing capacity. So in that report, was trying to make connections. So much for the good technology, I was trying to make good connections about what is a good thing to invest in. And we talk about Victoria Line upgrade, which was renewing the ATO, which was originally there in 1968. So that was that one in my birth year, the automatic train operation. And in order to increase the number of trains per hour, so they went up from 27 to 36 trains per hour. That really makes a significant difference to the number of people that move there. And there were some other case studies, including HS2, a railway that has been much talked about in the UK. So those were the sort of connections we were trying to cement in railway engineers and railway practice, and how that connects into policy in the United Kingdom, for example. IMechE, beyond the railway division, has also been making connections, and prior to that had come up with a concept very much like the waste hierarchy that people think of, in terms of reuse and so reduce the amount that you use and then reuse it, and then ultimately recycle it and dispose of gently. So there's a similar sort of hierarchy where the best thing to do is to reduce the amount of transport you have, because it uses energy, it creates congestion, it creates air pollution. And then beyond reducing transport, then switch to the most efficient mode. So that from cars to active travel or to public transport or whatever is most appropriate. And then within each mode, let's get better at what we do. So that applies to all of us. So that's that kind of thinking about how to optimize transport and to tread more lightly. Obviously, it's great that we're all here on a webinar today, so that is doing that contribution to reduce in the first instance if we don't need to travel. So then coming back to the railway industry itself and looking at the connections that we're making within the railway industry, we've got this railway technical strategy where we have these four things, four C's, custom and carbon and capacity and cost. So fundamentally, we want to be less carbon and less cost, more capacity and happier customers. That's the sort of headlines, and then how that's delivered in looking at these functional priorities that you can see here. And the point about this is there's loads of detail. So taking just that one stream about being freight friendly and very much hearing the government's target that was set in 2023 for freight growth of at least 75%. That's going towards doubling freight. And then to move how we would actually deliver that. So to make it not just a high level policy document or a strategy, but to have huge detail. So I'm not expecting that you'll be able to read this slide, but there's huge detail here about what are the elements that need to happen, what are the pathways, and how can we progress that. So this has been a consistent strategy since it was first put together in 2007. I was working on it when I was in engineering director at ATOC, and then subsequently it's been refreshed. So it's updated, but it's not changed fundamentally in that sort of aspiration around those 4 Cs and how, as an industry, we're trying to get there and to support infrastructure investment and to support technological improvements and making those changes. And then if you just look at some of the examples of that within the railway industry itself, I think it's very exciting to note the investment in flexible freight traction that's been going on. This is hybrid in several ways, several different sorts of technology. So it's able to operate in different parts of the UK and abroad, where we have different forms of electrification and different energy sources. And some very impressive credentials on that, being able to accelerate quickly and brake quickly and be flexible. Some nice shiny new locos that have been purchased different companies recently. And also to look at in another area, in the passenger area, for example, where there's been significant investment in retrofitting, particularly looking at retrofitting different power systems. So on the left there, you have solar power panels, which power, and there's a theme here about the length of route. There's solar panels on the roof of the depot, on the roof of the train there, power a 3 kilometre route in a commercial route in New South Wales, where it runs around the Byron Bay. And then if you look at the top, hydrogen's been a lot of work done, led by Porterbrook and others in the UK, retrofitting that EMU, which now has a 300-kilometre range. Porterbrook was the first to mainline test hydrogen in the UK. And also to look at that new record that was broken this summer, with the range of a battery vehicle, with a lot of work based on those Viva Rail vehicles, which have now been rolled out into Great Western Railways there. So that's the industry. Back to the government. What connections are they making? What joining up with greenhouse gas emissions, with the whole carbon agenda, and how rail can help with the decarbonisation, as it were, of transport. And there's some aspirations here, but that's not so clear about the pathway to get to these. Although in Scotland, I would say, if you look at the delivery on this piece I've just put up, they probably are nearer being on track to net zero. But that's a work in progress of delivering on those connections. And going beyond the connections, to think back to that modal shift that the IMechE has in their policy, then what is it that rail contributes? And I always feel rather sad when I look at the sort of number of trips per person and think, how significant can we possibly be at 2% of the trips that people make? Or even if you look at it another way around, at the number of miles per person in that green bar there, 8% of the miles per person are by rail and 78 by car. So although we are delivering 65 billion passenger kilometres, which is back up to pre-COVID levels, which is double what it was prior to privatisation in the mid-90s. So it's, on the one level, it's not insignificant. On another level, as this very subtle point here is in this government document, the rail was not the common mode of transport. It wasn't the most used. And it certainly wasn't the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where it is up to now. Okay, so what about the next 200 years, if you like a 200 vision rather than a 2020? going towards 2020, 25, how far could railways go? What should we do with these four C's? The less carbon and cost, more capacity, more customer happiness, more customers, more happening. What are the parameters that we need to connect? What do we need to work on? So my thoughts then that I want to set out in the next part of the talk are around speed, cost, seamless culture and politics. So to make these sorts of connections so that the faster you go, the very much more energy you consume, the more it costs, the more carbon you generate, more emissions. And about the cost, looking at different transport modes and how there are governmental choices about how they're costed. They're either paid by taxes or by the fare payer, and how level a playing field there is with other transport modes and how they are funded, and what we want to actually achieve as a society, which takes us more into that culture and politics lower on my list. And also to have that middle piece that I've got there about seamless, a way of what it might be a more radical way of looking at railway technology, going beyond the steel on steel and the guided rail, keep taking those, but where could we go that would make better connections, unlock future potential? So, could railway technology be better? Of course it could. How would we want it to be better? Well, is it a question of speed? So these are, I don't know if you can see behind me, my poster that I've put on this slide here as well of the world speed record holding TGV that I worked on in 1991, which is there listed in the Munich Transport Museum. So the Germans are happy to parade the French achievement. So yes, trains could go fast. Different parts of the world, different significances. Stockton to Darlington, the anniversary celebrated last Saturday. 15 miles an hour was important because it beat a horse. So that's why they picked that was significant, the 15 miles an hour. How fast do we want to go? The US, they're very excited about going as much as 160 miles per hour. And Europe is more standard around 188. Where are we going with HS2? How fast do we want to go? What's worth it? Because that energy costs us, and the environmental impact costs us as a society. How fast should they go in 22, 25? And then how long should railways last? This is very much thinking about embedded carbon and how long infrastructure lasts and valuing long life infrastructure. We had this vision on the left there from the capacity report of 2017, and then the somewhat reduced length of the HS2 route over on the right there in the latest publication. So should they last longer, and how can we account for that? How do we make the connections into government in that when they have different criteria for assessing? And 100 years is far too long a time frame for any government to countenance. Then back to rolling stock from infrastructure and thinking about maintenance versus new trains, about that again, about the embedded carbon that's in the railway vehicles that we've already made. Should we be looking more at refurbishment and less at throwing them away and getting new ones? Unfortunately, couldn't have a picture of inside the Technic Centre in SNCF that we visited because they were wary about taking pictures. So it's a kind of advert for the IMechE technical tour. You had to be there. But we did see bare metal midlife overhauls of stock that was built in the 1980s. That stuff I was working on in 91, which are just being midlife refurbished some 40 years on. So that's looking at a very much longer life than we often look at in the UK for vehicles, 35, 40 years. And a big contrast to the thinking at the beginning of privatisation, where the sort of governmental sort of ask was, couldn't we just make a throwaway train? Couldn't we just not over-engineer it and do a train that would last 7 years? Because that would be very convenient, because the plan was for franchises to last that long. So then we wouldn't have had to have rolling stock leasing companies, and would have made that sort of world very different in UK rail. So all sorts of thinking about long-lived rolling stock all over the world and how it's been supported, lavished with tender loving care. which has been very effective as a strategy to maybe to honour that more. But it involves investing in that asset management as a key thing there. Anyway, more thoughts on this will be at next year's conference. So, on various things. There's next year's conference in the summer in May. Is going to be on long life assets. In the meantime, we've got a conference on improving maintenance and how we can be more efficient in inspection and maintenance, and that's coming up next month now on the 6th of November. So it's a few adverts here. Okay, so back to my big thinking then. For 2025, how could railways be different? So first time when I sort of challenged myself with that idea, I thought I would go and find out what everybody else had said. A bit of research. So the railway technical strategy that we referred to earlier goes to 2040. Arup, usually good for long-term thinking, big thinking. They only go to 2050, although they did write it in 2019. And what they wrote there is, well, it's a bit incremental, and some of it's a bit incidental to rail. And some of it's happening already, which was happening a bit then, and it's happening more so since, in fairness. So they did think about automating passenger trains, and some more sort of, that reliability was significant, but there wasn't anything really radical, I thought, for me in this, and it's only going to 2050, and that's only 25 years away. I mean, I might still be alive to be proved wrong then, whereas my 200-year vision I'm more confident of. So how to get that 200-year vision then? I thought, well, we could go and ask the customer, find out what it is customers want. So I thought freight first. And I found that just this summer in July, the institution, a collective, 220,000 UK manufacturers, who are in Make UK, they published a report saying, from their research that they'd done of those 20,000 manufacturers, they're really keen on, for example, reinstating HS2 to the Leeds and to Manchester. They're really keen on using railways for what they're good at and wanting to be able to have multimodal transport more easily. And they're very keen on increased rail investment also for helping people to get to work for them, as well as a way of transporting goods, both supplies in and goods out. So there's some demand there. What about railway passengers? I thought I'd turn that on its head from a usual way that's asked. And I looked up the most common complaints that railway passengers have: punctuality and reliability, having enough room to get into the carriage and to stand, to sit, being the really top issues. So those are capacity related things. We need punctuality and reliability. That could be solved by better, more connected end-to-end journeys to join things up, so people aren't stressing about needing to change trains. This train is running late. What happens to my connection? And the other bit about having enough capacity to have that. And there's another train along shortly that you needn't get this one. You could get one that's got more space on it. And we could fundamentally, how could we flex it so that there is the capacity? Very easy to ask, hard to deliver. Could we just find some more carriages to do this journey or whatever? So I got thinking more about some work that I did a few years ago and was part of. If beyond running trains close together, what if you didn't actually have to change between them, and we could flex vehicle deployment to meet that passenger demand, and we could path very simply with homogeneous stock that for passengers and make space for freight trains with the same sort of acceleration and braking characteristic. So this is a thought then, a radical sort of technology change. Stick to the steel on steel. But could we join up trains literally on the move? So this is predicated on us having ERTMS. So we've got level 2 signalling. So it's all radio controlled signalling. We haven't got any lights on sticks, train to train. They talk to each other. And we could have a train that starts on the left here, and it runs continuously non-stop at a steady speed, just below line speed. And a rear carriage comes off. That's anyone who wants to get off, gets into the back carriage. and they then trundle down and go into a station, which is just in a loop, and they get off. And obviously there's level access, which is easy for people in accessible chairs, and for people to then access other means of transport from there. And then similarly to join from those and to go into a one carriage, and then that carriage to speed up ahead of the continuously flowing train, and then join onto it at the beginning, and then you can hop off this carriage, just walk down back inside the train, or go in a travelator or whatever sort of mechanism until you're in the right carriage for whenever you're going to be getting off. Concept. So this would look like this in my very bumpy diagram. Ooh, those two carriages going off for a different route. So you can get directly to places that you can't get to now by either joining up from individual places or connecting on. So there's a whole way of using the network differently, by rather than people changing at train stations, having the trains themselves joining and sticking together with different carriages as they're going along. So this was modelled based on Middle and Main Line with a bunch of assumptions to see what difference it could make. So this is looking at the train graphs. This is so it's different if you're looking at the occupation of the railway over time, and where the different trains would fit in that, different services being run. And essentially you could run these together, you could join these two trains together as one train. So what would that do for you? Is the question. And that means essentially a lot less stopping and starting. And stopping and starting is energy use. It costs money, it costs carbon, has an impact. And it means that there are more train paths because we're using the more effectively the capacity that we have. So that would halve the carbon and halve the energy required to run the railway. And it would also hugely increase the customer connectivity, as people will be able to travel from one point on the network through to another point on the network, which might otherwise be 2 or 3 changes, which are the pain points for people in their journeys, and their anxiety around reliability and the sheer faff of having to train. And at the same time, we will be able to better optimize the carriages to meet where people wanted to travel to and from. So there'd be more people on them, but still not uncomfortably many. And that means that we wouldn't need so many carriages, so it'd be more cost effective as well. So those various things. So I thought maybe if I tell that in a story about what that might mean, if we look at, this is today's railway map in the UK, or sorry, it's just the southern bit of it, just taking us up as far as York, which is where I want to go on this occasion. So if I was starting out from holiday in Cornwall, and I would then say I were to use a rubber-tired autonomous road vehicle, yeah, and I would get a shared one because that would come out of my carbon budget, and that would be much more cost effective for me, running a long way through where there aren't steel on steel vehicles. And I would have the opportunity to have some conversation with some local people, find out what's going on in that part of the world, that kind of benefit of the journey. Then I could join what we very much look like as the sleepers that we have nowadays, the sleeper train, and I could have a nice space where I could lie down and rest like I do now on the Riviera. And then when we get to London, let's cut out all those disconnected terminals. Let's have a continuous flow where I can have breakfast in the dining car, and maybe my child comes over from Marseille or whether she's living at the time and joins in with me, and so we have breakfast together there. So I just move down inside the trains on my way for the sleeping area into the breakfast area, or it transforms itself, innovative interiors, and then move on towards York, and then maybe my dad could join us, and directly from his door through his mobility scooter, feeding into an autonomous vehicle that feeds in, so he doesn't have to worry about taxis being on time and stuff, that he would just feed in and join us, and we'd have an accessible space where he could park up and we could chat. And then maybe my nephew and his family join us, and we need space for baby changing, and we need suitable high chairs and things for them to eat, and then when we're having coffee with them. And then of course we arrive at National Railway Museum. Where else will we go? Possibly other than York, we might go to Shildon or wherever, but and we have that time together that we're having joined up together on the way in a seamless fashion, and then we can all peel off back in reverse, and then maybe I could, you could even hop off a bit early, a few 5 miles early, and get a bit of a fresh air and a bike ride, go that way home. So that sort of vision of taking, even if we just take the railway that we have and use it differently, with populating it with vehicles that are in ERTMS, which is going to be a possible technology in the next, today's technology that's currently being rolled out, and then to use that to take the next step towards joining up vehicles as a bit of a vision. So what's stopping us then? So what's stopping the freight companies, or the manufacturers, those 20,000 manufacturers and others, from shipping things by rail? Cost. So that's a political decision about how much we charge, how much we rate that, and about capacity. So that's like understanding what's possible. And so that question then, that maybe we're not valuing more carbon efficient modes as much. Carbon isn't costing enough. The pollution that we're doing, the environmental impact that we're having, to cause us to have the right behaviours. So this is a comment from the Progress Committee in Adapting to Climate Change. How are the various sectors getting on? And the transport sector, reviewed by another institution, Mechanical Engineers fellow Julia Brown, who sits on that committee. She says, and their report says that there are good policies and plans for rail, but very politely, limited delivery and implementation. That's the challenge to actually enable for that to actually happen. So thinking more about carbon and wanting to think about that positively, I was thinking maybe we could make this connection as people. I'm thinking about what's happened in the last 20 years. Smoking in the UK has moved into being really widely seen as antisocial, and it was in 2006 when I was breastfeeding that the change was made to make outlaw smoking from cafes, which was a hugely nice thing to have as far as I was concerned. So, and I'm wondering then, this poster on the left here, not here, from Zurich, will we have that kind of concept that will happen to carbon? Will having a big carbon footprint be seen as antisocial next? And that's the kind of change to public perception. And again, then also, what about the change to public perception of public transport? Will that change more as it becomes free? And this is, lots of cities have got free public transport, and the latest I'm aware of is in Belgrade, that we came across on holiday last year, where there are very challenging, steep, as you can see there, services being delivered by trams for free, and whether that will start moving car ownership. And then a third sort of criterion set then on the right about climate change and where the adverse impacts of climate change will be, even just looking at gross domestic product, the output of countries. So the countries that will benefit from global warming, climate change, are those bluey ones, and the countries that will lose are the pinky ones, and that lose more are the darker red ones. So will we reevaluate the sort of impact that we're having on the world in the next, sooner than the next 200 years within that frame? So looking positively, now on the left, we have Slovenia, and they're sort of saying, my way of traveling around, and their sort of aspirations. They've got a kind of countryside code type thing for being a tourist. They've expanded that to cities, and they're saying, it's far too small to read here, but prioritize public transport, use our walking guides, do these things, use our wheeling, these things that are enable a lower carbon footprint from your holiday. So I'm thinking maybe that could be a question of the people driving the politics to make those decisions. So moving towards my summary then, engineering good railway connections. We've got the IMechE standing. Now we can talk about these things and engage with parties. I'm wondering about whether that fits. See, just thinking back to that autobiography of the person in German railways in 2017 and the museum's analysis that it was competition from the railways. Maybe we should look more to being complementary with other modes. That's very much the vision of that Make UK freight people, was that let's use road for what it's good at, let's use rail for what it's good at. And the concept with the seamless, that passenger railway I was proposing, was that it doesn't really matter as long as it joins together, and it's that end-to-end delivery that people see, that we can optimize what bit of transport we use to deliver your journey in different ways um, to make that the best journey it can be by complementing modes. And then we obviously need to make connections between industrial and railway and skills policies, so that overall transport vision. And it needs to be over time. I've talked about having a long view and this 100 to 200 year plan. No reason why we shouldn't. It's just been proving very hard to have long-term infrastructure investment in this country, as people are aware, and making connections with other engineering and other professional institutions, and making connections with reality too. I do think that's rather important. So it's making that back to that rail technical strategy that we have, that the industry owns, and which identifies little steps that we can make, they can actively take to move on. So I'm talking about making connections with railway engineers, people, and what we do in our day jobs, and in my focus as chair to try and draw in new railway engineers and to try and keep the rest of us inspired. So just want to do a few adverts in terms of inspiration and those things. There's lots of things going on in the railway division. The day I gave my chair's address in London, we had a seminar about managing fractures safely, sorts of crack mechanics going on. Then last weekend was the big celebration of 200 years past of rail. So I kind of steered that towards 200 years future. And we had a panel event for the George Stephenson lecture, looking at the next 200 years and where that could be going, those sort of challenges, different visions from R&D perspectives, from HS2 perspectives, and from train operator perspectives. And then going in this month, we're starting up with the Railway Challenge, when early career professionals and university students build their own loco and find all the challenges to do with that. The finals are open to the public and to join in June every year. That is usually the last weekend in June. That's all on the website. I mentioned already the automation conference. We've got the annual dinner coming up. We've got young engineers and railway apprentices seminar. We've got primary engineer. This is how to really change the world, is to engage with children while they're at primary school. So looking for volunteers to take part in a school and encourage those sort of challenges from them, and see what they're interested in their aspirations, and a whole bunch of other events, both nationally and then looking towards the centres that we have around in the UK, and we also have centre in India, and we have other groups internationally. So we've got those better connections that we can make with international centres and with the IMechE website. So this, looking for those of us who are railway engineers, how we can connect better customer carbon capacity cost. There's a lot of us, we can do stuff. I'm very inspired by young engineers who I've met who've various guises in the last few months while I've been chair, think about procurement and about clarity on processes, professionalism, presentation skills, leadership, which is really positive for me, and hopefully for all of us, in a virtuous circle of inspiration to influence that's both inside the railway and around the railway in terms of policymakers. So here's a picture of the people that were on the railway technical tour last year outside the rail centre in the Netherlands, and Amersfoort, and the Railway Division Luncheon, where one of the biggest events for the railway and for the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, where we have typically 1,200 people. So that's a great opportunity to engage. and to make connections and to talk to people, listen to people, hear what's happening. Then I just wanted a last reflection before I turn over to asking questions. Something I learned from a boss who wasn't one for great aphorisms, but this was really effective, that the customer is always the customer. So to understand the customer perspective, just took a few snaps from my holidays then. Trains is not just a means of getting from A to B, but it's a place where you can be. There's a space to play, that one on the left, families going to the beach, we went all the way down Italy, a place to meet people. Now this was bizarrely, we were in Montenegro, traveling up from through Montenegro, this fantastic scenery, but the person that we met there was a professor from Bogota in Colombia. So the conversations we were able to have with this anthropology professor, and that it was enabled to us because we were on the train, and that space that we could do that different sort of learning, as well as what we were seeing out the window, these amazing feats of civil engineering and the train surviving to go up there, and learning about the place where we were and the conflicts that have been there and how that's moving on. So many dimensions of learning and experiencing that railways can provide to mere passengers, as I was on my holiday. And then very specifically, then there was brilliant on-train toilet cleaning that was maintained, all supplies kept up all the way down a very long journey down Italy. And the guard, who on successive Croatian trains, very impressive set of guards who were not only supporting people with tickets and connections, all sorts of information, they were selling pivo, voda, sok, as they called out, which was beer, water, juice. So it was providing us with refreshment as well. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining this. My questions then are: engineering good railway connections. What do you want? What have you got? What do you think of this? What do you want to challenge me on? What's your vision? What inspires you? So I welcome any questions in the Q&A or pick up with me afterwards. But thank you for listening, and let's continue the conversation in one form or another. Thank you. Oh, that's my email address if you want to ping your questions across. In case that's useful to you. And then I'll stop sharing on the right button. Okay, so I don't know if anyone would like to ping questions into the Q&A. And when I've delivered this in person, sometimes people have been a bit shell-shocked to start with. I don't know where to start on that. So any comments would be welcome as well, if you would rather. I'm afraid we don't have the facility to turn on microphones in this format. So, but you are very welcome to jot down a question. Oh, and I did want to reassure you that I am wearing the badge. So this is the official chair's badge. It is the official chair talking to you. It was a bit out of camera.